Hello and welcome to Silicon Slopes Live. Today we are joined by nurse practitioner Deborah Morgan. She's joining us from the University of Utah Health Systems. Deborah, we're here to talk about mental health. So tell us a little bit about how mental health in the pandemic is going.
Hi, well, thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about what's a very important and fast-moving situation. This is a very dynamic situation with the pandemic, and little is really known at the moment about what to expect in terms of the impact on mental health. But we do know that there will be an impact. Data so far, both globally and here in the US, is definitely pointing to an uptick in depression, anxiety, substance use, among those individuals that maybe already had pre-existing mental conditions, but also among those who have not had any history of mental health conditions. And, as we move through today and chat together, we'll talk about some of the risk factors and why we think we're seeing some of those, but it's definitely an impact. And I like to think of the mental health implications as being almost a second front line. Obviously, the first front line is the physical impact of the pandemic. And, my colleagues on the front line in terms of the hospitals, the EDs, the ICUs, those kind of things. But for us mental health providers, I truly feel we're going to be forming the second front line of this pandemic.
Yeah, definitely. So tell us a little bit about yourself and what you
Mhm.
specialize in.
Sure. So I'm a psychiatric nurse practitioner. I'm on the faculty at the College of Nursing at the University of Utah. I completed my doctoral degree in psychiatric mental health nursing and also a graduate certification in gerontology there at the university. So my role there at the university is kind of twofold. I have a clinical role and also an academic role. So on the clinical side, I work in a variety of settings, all within the university. I work at the Dementia Clinic at Research Park, and also in the Geriatric Medical Home Clinic, which is also over on Fort Hills. And in both those clinics, I see older adults and those individuals with cognitive disorders such as dementia. And then on the academic side, I teach the geriatric psychiatry class in the Doctor of Nursing practice program at the College of Nursing.
Wonderful. That's awesome. Okay. So like the pandemic is hard. It's really hard. My husband and I and with our son, we regularly discuss how hard it is. It's kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
pressure release valve to acknowledge
Right.
what's happening and to kind
Mm-hmm.
of say it out loud to make it a little bit easier for all of us. But I know that not all of us have that opportunity. And
Mm-hmm.
you work specifically in geriatric care. So tell us a little bit about like what you're seeing, what you're expecting to come from this pandemic for that age group.
Right. So the older adults really have what I think of as kind of a triple whammy in terms of mental health. First of all, older adults are disproportionately affected by the disease itself. We know that 8 out of 10 deaths are in the over 65s. So they have all the worries about, getting the disease, what happens to them if they get the disease. There's also the concern of, do I go and see a healthcare provider for something that's not the disease? Do I see them about my chronic illnesses? But what's the risk of not going to see them? You have to weigh those up as well. And then we also know that they're also disproportionately impacted by the prevention and containment measures, which is the social isolation, the quarantine. Lots of older adults live by themselves as it is, and they're at a higher risk for loneliness and isolation anyway, regardless of the pandemic. So many older adults really rely on activities and visitors from outside of the home to provide them with that social engagement, which we know is so important for brain health. It's important for our mood. It's also important for our cognition and memory. So kind of being removed from that element of social engagement is really detrimental to mental health. And also, there's kind of an increasing stigmatization, if you will, of older adults. We're seeing different things in the press about, sacrificing the old adults for the sake of the economy. We're seeing, really derogatory terms such as boomer remover, and God's waiting room, all those kind of things. So all those elements are really kind of playing into the mental health of older adults and putting them at much higher risk for negative outcomes.
Yeah, for sure. I know all of my parents, including my in-laws, are over 60, but
Mm-hmm.
I don't view them that way. They're insanely healthy and very active, and they have taken some personal offense to being considered
Right.
high risk, but they are. I mean, that's just kind
Yeah.
of their reality. And
Yeah.
there's kind of a lot of different realities that they're facing. Specifically, we one of our grandmothers is having a hard time at the grocery store. And it's not
Hmm.
because she needs help buying groceries. It's because anytime she asks for help, people are afraid to help her because of her age. And it's
Right.
kind of this weird, like, protective bubble. So
Yeah.
are we seeing isolation even in those situations where people are trying to engage in their community or live their daily lives?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think, that's a really good point that you bring up there, because we do tend to homogenize older adults as being this huge mass of identical people. And if you think you've already brought that up in your own family, but if you think of everyone you know from, say, age 65 to 100, they are completely disparate. They're just as diverse as any other generation. I think of my own dad back in the UK. He's 75 this year. He can out-hike me on any mountain in Utah. I mean, he's in fantastic shape. He can turn his hand to any task. He's cognitively very, very sharp. And he's really kind of abided by, he's a rule follower. So he's really abided by the rules in the UK and hasn't gone to the grocery store. He's had, family members. And that worries me, because that's almost making older adults more dependent than they need to be. It's lumping them all together again. But kind of back to your point in terms of those older adults who are attempting to engage, absolutely. There's this common belief, which is true, that older adults are more heavily impacted by the disease, but they don't spread the disease more than younger adults. Everybody, is capable of spreading the disease as much as the next person. And in fact, the older adults are more likely to show symptoms. So they're actually probably safer to help in the grocery store than maybe a younger adult who may be asymptomatic and just as capable of spreading. So absolutely, and again, on the grocery store situation, one of the things that grocery stores have tried to do, which I think was done with really the best will in the world, but this senior shopping hours, which almost is kind of tantamount to kind of a benevolent ageism, if you will. It's separating older adults again. It's marginalizing older adults again. It's making them feel that they're special cases and need to go to the grocery store and not mingle with other generations, which is so critical for our human existence, really.
Yeah, for sure. I was looking up some numbers before this, and we have almost 500,000 people who fall into that age group just in
Mhm.
Utah alone. And
Right.
there's so much diversity in 500,000
Mhm.
people. There's so much um, diverse abilities and things that people
Mhm.
can do, but there are also populations in the latter of that range who might be already suffering from pre-existing conditions
Mhm.
or mental health issues. So how can we help our older citizens? How can we help our older family members not only stay connected but stay healthy?
Right. And that's a great question. I think that's something we each need to ask ourselves. How can we help those particular individuals? Because we know the individuals better than, any national or state entity. So we can really kind of gauge what level of help we need. But I think the key thing really is to ask them, and ask them if they need help. And also we can use the kind of one of the nice things I think that's come out of COVID in terms of mental health is it's been a great normalizer. To some degree, we're all feeling some anxiety. Either we felt it earlier in the pandemic, we're feeling it now, or we'll feel it in the future. We're all dealing with, unknown, uncharted territory. We're dealing with financial issues potentially. We're dealing with job issues. We're all trying to work from home. I'm talking to you now from home, hoping for dear life that my dogs don't suddenly decide to join in and bark away. They probably will at the most inopportune moment. But we're all struggling. We're all having anxiety. So we can take that and talk to. A lot of older adults don't feel comfortable talking about mental health. It's a generational thing. It's just not something that they're as comfortable with or feel needs discussing as much as younger generations. So we can take that, we can normalize it, and we can use that shared human experience to really encourage them to open up. You could chat to your in-laws or your grandparents and say, gosh, I'm really starting to feel kind of anxious about this. How about you? What's troubling you most about it? And I think by having that shared platform, people are more open to sharing and then letting us know, what we can do in terms of helping them.
Definitely. So, I mean, that's what we can do right now as we're going through this.
Mhm.
But what does the future look like for your specialty? Like, what does the future look like? What kind of support systems are we going to need in place to
Mhm.
help people who are going to be permanently? I mean, our entire world is going to be permanently affected by this. That's not something that's going away.
Right.
But as
Mhm.
we deal with those older generations and look to help them and support them through this, what are some of the stumbling blocks that we might see?
So I think one of the probably most commonly thought of stumbling block is that older adults aren't comfortable with technology. And to be perfectly honest, when we first kind of went into restrictions here in Utah, when the university first, had us work from home and see patients virtually, my first thought was, well, I work with older adults. This just isn't going to go well. We're not going to be able to do Zoom or whatever platform. And honestly, I've been really very pleasantly surprised. I have patients in their 90s who are quite happily jumping on Zoom. They're having Zoom happy hours with their friends and family. They're having Zoom dinners with family members across the country. So for those individuals who are interested in technology, we need to not just presume that they can't do it or don't have an interest. And I think that's going to just continue to be important as this moves forward. We are going to stay probably under social restrictions. So you're absolutely right. We need to think of new interventions, innovative ways to use technology for older adults. Obviously, there will be some older adults who just aren't comfortable. There's younger adults that aren't comfortable with technology. Again, this isn't kind of generalizing, but let's be a little bit more kind of creative in ways that we can be social. Encourage get-togethers on the driveway with social distancing. Send your older adult family members subscriptions to engaging magazines that they may be interested in, Nat Geo and those kind of things. Or if they have hobbies, help engage them in their hobbies, talk to them about their hobbies, call them on a daily basis and seeing how the woodworking piece they're working on is coming along. Just keep that level of engagement. And like I said, really try and harness technology. The baby boomers who are those born in kind of 1945 up to about 1960, they are very technologically savvy as a whole. Again, there's exceptions, but really younger generations can help engage their older family members and friends in the use of technology. And I'd be really interested to see innovations in new technology specifically aimed at these age groups, and also aimed at older adults maybe with cognitive impairments who really do tend to struggle a little bit more with technology.
Definitely. So speaking of cognitive impairments,
Mm-hmm.
Alzheimer's runs in my family.
Uh-huh.
And it's also something that you've worked on extensively with Alzheimer's and dementia patients. What
Absolutely.
what are we seeing in those vulnerable populations, not
Mhm.
just from the isolation, but from potential deterioration as well?
Absolutely. And you've really kind of hit the nail on the head with the word deterioration. It's a huge risk. People with living with dementia and their care partners, we never really see one dementia patient. We see what we call a dyad. It's the patient and their care partner. Usually their care partners are older adults themselves and are typically providing 24-hour care for these individuals who are living with a progressive disease. Individuals with dementia are extremely vulnerable. They really rely on structure and routine. That's the best thing that we can do environmentally for people living with dementia. Provide the same routine on a daily basis. Having to make choices and decisions can just become overwhelming for the brain with dementia. So they're really struggling from that lack of routine. If they were going to adult daycare, if they were going to senior centers, if they were having outdoor carers coming in, all of that's kind of gone away to some degree. And also, an individual with dementia, they may not be able to process what's going on, but they have feelings. They can pick up on anxiety, they can pick up on stress and depression. And in dementia, that can lead in varying degrees to what we term, behaviors, because when somebody with dementia gets anxious, they may not know how to express it. So then we may see increased agitation, we may see increased confusion, disorientation. We can see some really serious impacts from this. So you're absolutely right. It's a very vulnerable population.
Definitely. So right now I've seen in a lot of the documentation of mental health going through this pandemic
Hmm.
that it's also an infodemic and that people are being overwhelmed with
Right.
real information, bad information, good
Hmm.
information, fake information. It's coming from all different corners of the earth. Is
Right.
there a way that we as younger generations can kind of take responsibility for that and maybe provide correct information to older adults who might be overwhelmed, whether or not
Hmm.
they have any kind of cognitive disorder?
Yeah, absolutely, and that's also a really valid point. I recommend for all of my patients that they really try and step back from news overload. As you mentioned, the temptation is to sit and just watch the 24-hour news cycle, and it's basically the same story pretty much all day, just delivered in different ways, and and that does increase anxiety. So I strongly recommend that patients, not just patients, but myself, family members, all of us, give ourselves, maybe 15, 20 minutes in the morning and 15, 20 minutes in the early evening, not too close to bedtime because that can tend to impact on sleep. And that can be when we get our news. Now, in terms of, reputable sources, for kind of facts and figures, state guidance, that kind of thing, the state of Utah has a really good coronavirus website. That's where we would recommend you go to just for that true scientific, facts and figures about what's happening in Utah. The university also has really good resources. It's hard to kind of guide people in terms of where they get their news. Everybody has their own bias in terms
Oh,
of the news they prefer. But I think, just in terms of those facts and figures, stick to the sources, being the state or the university. And then, like I said, wherever you get your news from, just limit it. Just don't gorge on it, however tempting it might be.
yeah, that's totally understandable.
Mhm.
You mentioned ageism a little bit ago, and
Right.
I want to circle back to that. We're hearing a lot of isms lately. Uh,
Hmm.
One of the good things and detrimental things of the pandemic is we've had time to take a good hard look at ourselves. But I
Right.
really feel like ageism is something that I personally gloss over. I don't want to
Hmm.
think about it. I don't want to think about my responsibility to the rest of my family, but I'm
Right.
already anxious enough. But ageism is a very real thing that we
Hmm.
are responsible for and that we are responsible to combat. Are there any ways that you can think of that anyone can help participate in combating ageism?
I think it's very much, the same kind of idea as the other isms, as you mentioned. What we need to do is educate ourselves. We need to really learn about, okay, who are the older adults in our country? What is the cultural makeup of them? What is the sexual orientation makeup of them? What is the education level? The financial. The more we learn, the more we'll see it's a hugely diverse group. I mean, from 65 to 100, you actually have three distinct generations within that group. It's not just one generation. And when we hit 65, and some people choose to retire, some don't, but when we hit 65, we don't all, there isn't like a switch that goes off and we all become this big homogenous unit. We stay the same individuals that we've been throughout the course of our lives. And honestly, maybe even more kind of heterogeneous, I think, than some of maybe younger generations, because we haven't been exposed to, the same kind of social media or that thing. So we're not all, older adults haven't maybe had the same similar experiences that younger adults, I think, are having more these days. So, really just education, just find out who those older adults are. And there's plenty of, go to the census site, find out what the cultural makeup is of adults over 65, and learn more about them. And the more you start kind of, delving in, the more you'll find, there's fashion icons over 65. There's, daredevil extreme sports people over the age of 65. There's everything in that age group that there is in the younger age groups.
Well, and I think there's a lot to connect with there. I know one person that I used to work for told me a story about his life that I would have never expected. He was arrested protesting in the South. He's not from the South. He went there to do this thing,
Right.
and it was just one of those things that he was just casually remarking on how he was
Uh-huh.
arrested one time, and it just floored me. It
Yeah.
absolutely floored me. And I think sharing a lot of those stories and those experiences between each other can help us kind of reconnect.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And absolutely, and I just wanted to as well, the one thing that's really kind of struck me in the past few weeks, you mentioned the other isms. Obviously, there's, you know, the Black Lives Matter movement going on at the moment. And I've been really impressed. And again, this I shouldn't be impressed because this is me again showing an inherent bias. But
Mhm.
I've been really impressed by the number of my patients in their 70s, 80s, beyond, who have said to me, you know, they want to educate themselves more, they want to learn more. So that just kind of shows you, you know, that this is a diverse, dynamic group that's always learning, always moving, and always growing as humans, just as the rest of us are.
Yeah, definitely. So I completely lost my list of questions that I was going to ask. So at this point, I'm just going to kick it over to you. So what else can you tell us about not only this age group, but things that we can do to support this age group and every age group throughout the
Mhm.
pandemic and after the pandemic? Because that's one of those things that not all of us are looking at really well. We're not planning for the post-pandemic
Right.
life where everything
Mhm.
has changed and we all operate differently. So go
Yeah.
ahead and tell us what you're thinking about that.
Right, and that's a really good point about this post-pandemic life, because I think that the vagueness of that, when is that? What does that look like? You know, is there post-pandemic life? All those uncertainties are really feeding into this kind of generalized anxiety. You know, and we our brains love to protect us and they love to be efficient, but they're also kind of lazy. You know, as an organ, it's a brilliant organ, but it's also a lazy organ. And from our very early years, our brains are forming these roadmaps that we know as schemas. And a schema is really it's a roadmap, it's a kind of a user guide for how do we behave in certain situations, what do we expect from certain situations. And even if a situation doesn't fit neatly into an existing schema, it gives us the basis. We can take something and pretty much play with it and come up with, you know, something that works for us. With the pandemic, we don't have a schema. We have this open-ended situation that seems to be going like this and then like this. It's ebbing, it's flowing, it's going on. So we really don't know what to expect in terms of the pandemic. And that lack of schema is really contributing to this generalized anxiety. There's actually an ongoing survey. It's through the National Office of Statistics and the Census Bureau. And they've developed this real-time online survey. It's called I believe it's the Household Pulse Taker or something like that. And each week, households are invited to go online and really just answer some basic questions. And within those questions are questions about generalized anxiety. And for the second week of June, the prevalence of anxiety symptoms was almost 32% among the adults that responded. Now, just to kind of put that in perspective, the annual prevalence for anxiety disorders in adults in this country is usually around 2.93%. So that's a huge uptick in anxiety. So to kind of answer your question about what can we do more long term, you know, I hate to use that old adage, self-care. We need to really practice self-care. We need to check in with ourselves frequently, just as we're checking in with loved ones. We need to normalize this. You know, this is unprecedented. These are uncharted territory. And we need to say to ourselves, it's okay to not feel okay. You know, we don't want to be feeling like that 24 hours of the day, because then there's, you know, more clinical problems that we need to really kind of get looked at. But it's okay to recognize when we're anxious, when we're feeling down. It's okay to not expect ourselves to maybe be as productive as we have been in the past. It's okay if our crazy dogs start barking in the middle of a really important Zoom presentation. You know, it's okay just to be kind to ourselves, and also really just to do those check-ins with our loved ones, and provide that support system. You know, I think one of the kind of the cruelest things about COVID is that when we, as humans, when we're in a anxiety provoking situation, we want to be around our people. We want our family members, we want our friends, we want our loved ones, we want to be able to kind of turn to them. And COVID's kind of taken that away to some degrees, you know, and we're going to have to find more innovative ways, whether that's technology or just more socially distanced gatherings. But, you know, really long answer to your question, I think it's just finding new ways to provide that support system that human beings really crave and need.
Oh, definitely. I mean, we are a world community, and at our most
Mhm.
basic, we are family units. So
Right.
that connection doesn't stop, even if we're silent for a bit. We've
Mhm.
got to reestablish all of those connections. So, well, I really appreciate your time. Is there a resource or a website that people might be able to go to, either as caretakers or
Mhm.
as patients in that age group themselves, to maybe kind of look into things that they might be able to do for themselves?
Yeah, so there's a couple. Firstly, AARP actually has some really good resources on their website, and they actually have a nice system for setting up what they call mutual aid groups, which is people helping people, so providing that sense of community. So I definitely recommend taking a look at that. If it's a family member with dementia or a caregiver, you can't do better than the Alzheimer's Association website. Absolute wealth of knowledge on there. They also offer a 24-hour live hotline, which is manned by master's level counselors, and they can really kind of help, just from minor questions up to full blown crises, they can really kind of help, you know, but just in general, reputable sources, like I said, the state, the university has some really good resources. And I have a whole list of resources that I'm happy to share with you about activities that can be kind of done online, some tailored towards older adults, some just more general. So happy to share that as well.
Yeah, fantastic. Just send that over and we'll make sure that that
Okay,
gets out to
will
all.
do. That'd be great.
Well, thank you so much for your time and for joining us. And hopefully, everybody wears masks, wash your hands, and tune in next time. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Take care. Thanks.